Elijah Carter had told himself the drive back to Georgia would feel like nothing. 5 years was long enough to turn a place into just coordinates on a map. He'd packed light, kept the radio on, let Damon sleep in the back seat so there'd be no questions he couldn't answer. He was wrong about all of it. When the truck rolled to a stop at the end of the dirt road, Elijah sat there with both hands still on the wheel and his foot frozen above the brake. The gate, the old iron gate his father had hung crooked and never fixed, was standing straight. New posts, fresh paint. Beyond it, the yard that had been swallowed by weeds when he left was cut clean, lined with raised garden beds running in neat rows toward the tree line. Smoke was coming from the chimney. And then the front door opened. A woman stepped out onto the porch, his porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel, squinting against the afternoon sun. She didn't look startled. She looked like someone who belonged there. Elijah's jaw tightened. One of them didn't. If you're new here, this channel tells stories about real people making hard choices in harder circumstances. If that's the kind of thing that stays with you, hit subscribe. There's more where this came from. 5 years earlier, Elijah Carter had been the kind of man who showed up. That was how his mother used to describe him. Elijah shows up. And she meant it as the highest compliment she knew how to give. He showed up to his father's job site at 16 to learn the trade. He showed up at Renee's door in the rain the night she told him she was scared and didn't know why. He showed up at the hospital every morning for 11 months straight while she fought something that couldn't be fought. And then Renee died, and his parents followed within a year. His mother first, then his father, as though the old man had decided there was nothing left worth staying for, and Elijah stopped showing up to anything. He packed what fit in the truck, strapped Damon into the back seat, and drove north out of Georgia without a plan. Damon was 3 years old. He slept most of the way and woke up asking for his mother, and Elijah answered the same way every time. "She's not here, buddy, but I am." That had to be enough. For a long time, it was the only thing Elijah had to offer. They moved through cities the way people move through bad weather, heads down, waiting for it to pass. Charlotte, Memphis, Cincinnati. Elijah picked up carpentry work wherever he could find it, the kind of jobs that paid cash and didn't ask for a permanent address. He was good with his hands, and being good with his hands meant he could always find something. It didn't mean he could find stability, but he told himself those were different problems and that he'd solve the second one later. Later never quite arrived. The farmhouse in rural Georgia, his parents' land, 40 acres of red clay and timber, and a 2-story house that had been in the family since his grandfather, sat untouched through all of it. Tax notices came to an old forwarding address. Legal notifications went unopened. Elijah knew, in the abstract way a person knows something they've chosen not to look at directly, that the property taxes were piling up. He told himself he'd deal with it when he was ready. What he meant was, when it stopped feeling like a place where everyone he loved had died. Damon was 8 now, and he had started asking questions that were harder to deflect. He asked why they never stayed anywhere long. He asked if they were ever going to have a house with a yard. Once, on a long drive between jobs, he asked if Elijah remembered what Grandma's kitchen smelled like. And when Elijah said, "Yeah, I remember," Damon pressed his forehead against the window and said, "I don't. I'm starting to forget it." That was the sentence that broke something open. Naomi Reeves had driven past the farmhouse 3 times before she finally pulled over. The 4th time, her car made the decision for her. The engine gave out 2 miles down the road, and when the tow truck driver asked where she wanted to be dropped, she looked back in the direction she'd come from and said, "Just leave me at the end of that dirt road." She'd been a registered nurse for 9 years, working a small hospital in eastern Tennessee that served the kind of rural community where everybody knew everybody and nobody liked to make a fuss. Naomi had always been careful, precise, the kind of nurse who documented everything twice and never cut corners. Which was why, when she saw what she saw, a senior physician falsifying discharge records to reduce hospital liability, she reported it. She was told, politely and then less politely, to reconsider. She didn't reconsider. The physician had been at that hospital for 22 years. Naomi had been there for 9. The math was not complicated. By the time the internal review concluded, she had been quietly reassigned, then quietly let go. Her lease ended the same month. Her older sister, who had never liked conflict, stopped returning her calls. Naomi loaded her car with what fit and drove south with no particular destination, which was how she ended up on a county road in Georgia, watching an abandoned farmhouse sit in the middle of 40 acres like something that had given up on being found. She told herself one night, maybe 2. But the morning after she arrived, she walked through the rooms and took stock of what was there. A structurally sound frame beneath the damage. Good bones, her father would have said. He'd been a carpenter in rural Tennessee who taught her how to read a wall before she was 10 years old. Floors that needed sanding, a roof that needed patching in 2 sections, windows that needed reglazing, a kitchen garden bed that had gone completely to seed. Naomi was not a person who could look at something fixable and walk away from it. She stayed. She bought seeds with what was left of her last paycheck and planted them in straight rows. She sourced lumber from a salvage yard 8 miles down the road and repaired the porch boards one by one. She patched the roof section by section, working in the early mornings before the Georgia heat set in. By the end of the first winter, the farmhouse was livable. By the end of the second, it was something closer to a home. One afternoon, while clearing out a back room, she found a small wooden box tucked beneath the floorboards. Inside, a folded note in a woman's handwriting, 2 silver wedding rings, and a family photograph she didn't recognize. The note read, "Elijah, this house will wait for you." Naomi didn't know who Elijah was. She set the box on the kitchen shelf carefully, the way you set down something that belongs to someone else. She sold vegetables, eggs, preserves, and baked goods at the county farmers market on Saturday mornings. The regulars knew her by name. Nobody asked too many questions about where she'd come from or who she was. This was the kind of place that gave a person room to be quiet about their past, and Naomi was grateful for that. She had found inside those walls the first thing in years that felt like it was genuinely hers. She did not yet know that it wasn't. The letter was different from the others. Elijah had gotten good at recognizing official mail by the weight of the envelope. The way government correspondence had a particular density to it, like the paper itself understood it was carrying consequences. He'd been ignoring that weight for 5 years, but this envelope had been forwarded twice before it finally caught up with him at the garage apartment in Cincinnati, where he and Damon had been living since February. And when he opened it and read the words, "Final notice of tax delinquency and public auction and 30 days, something in him went very still. He set the letter on the kitchen table. He read it again. Then he sat down and stared at it for a long time without moving. Damon came in from school, dropped his backpack, opened the refrigerator and closed it again. Then he noticed the look on his father's face and came to stand beside the table. He looked at the letter the way 8-year-olds look at things they know are serious, with wide, careful eyes. "What is it?" Damon asked. "Something I should have dealt with a long time ago," Elijah said. Damon looked at the return address on the envelope. He could read well for his age. He sounded it out quietly. "Fulton County, Georgia." "Is that Grandma's house?" he asked. Elijah didn't answer right away. "Are we going to lose it?" Damon pressed. "Not if I can help it." Damon was quiet for a moment. Then he said in the careful, measured tone of a child who has learned not to ask for too much, "Can I come?" Elijah looked at his son, at the particular stillness in Damon's face that had always reminded him of Renee, the way she went quiet when something mattered deeply to her, and said, "Yeah, you're coming." They left 2 days later before dawn with a single bag each and Elijah's toolbox in the bed of the truck. Damon slept for the first 4 hours. When he woke up somewhere past Knoxville, he pressed his face against the glass and watched the landscape change. The mountains flattening, the trees thickening, the red clay starting to show through the roadside embankments. "I remember the color of the dirt," Damon said, mostly to himself. Elijah kept his eyes on the road. He had spent 2 days telling himself that going back was practical. The house needed to be dealt with. The taxes needed to be paid. He was a grown man with a legitimate claim to a piece of property, and the adult thing to do was to go and sort it out. That was all this was. But the closer they got to the county line, the less that framing held. He started seeing exits he recognized. A gas station where his father used to stop for boiled peanuts. A water tower with the town name painted in letters that had faded to almost nothing. A long curve in the road where the tree canopy closed overhead and the light went green and dim, and which Elijah had driven through 1,000 times as a boy without once thinking it was remarkable. It hit him somewhere in that curve. He had missed this place. He had been so busy being angry at it for holding all his grief that he had never once let himself acknowledge that he had also loved it, and that leaving had cost him something he hadn't fully accounted for. He did not say any of this to Damon. When the truck stopped at the end of the dirt road, Elijah sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel, taking in what he was seeing. He had prepared himself for ruin. He had expected collapsed gutters and a porch swallowed by vines and windows dark with years of abandonment. He had been ready for the particular sadness of watching something you'd neglected confirm that it was beyond saving. Instead, there was a gate that hung straight. There was a yard cut clean and bordered by garden beds thick with late-season growth. There was smoke rising from the chimney of a house that had no business being warm and lived in and whole. And then the front door opened and a woman walked out. She was somewhere in her mid-30s, wearing a canvas work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, drying her hands on a dish towel. She stopped when she saw the truck. Her expression shifted from mild curiosity to something more guarded. Elijah got out. Damon climbed out behind him and stood close. "Can I help you?" the woman said. Her voice was level, not hostile but not welcoming either. "This is my property," Elijah said. A beat of silence. "I'm sorry," she said. He reached into the truck and pulled out the folder he'd brought from Cincinnati. Deed, title documentation, the tax notice. He held it out. "Elijah Carter. My parents owned this land. I have the paperwork." Naomi Reeves took the folder. She opened it. She read the first page slowly, and Elijah watched the color shift in her face. Not guilt exactly, but something closer to the look of a person watching the ground change beneath them. "I didn't know," she said finally. "When I found this place, it had been empty for years. The door wasn't locked. There was no—" She stopped, steadied herself. "I wasn't stealing from anyone. I was just trying to survive. You've been living in my family's house. I've been keeping your family's house from falling down," she said quietly. It wasn't defiant. It was just true. The silence stretched. Elijah looked past her at the porch he and his father had built when he was 14. The boards were new. The railing had been reset level. Someone had done that work carefully, the way his father would have done it. Then Damon stepped around him and walked up the porch steps and pushed open the front door. "Damon," Elijah started, but Damon was already inside. A few seconds passed, then his voice floated back through the screen door, small and certain. "Dad, it smells like Grandma's kitchen." Elijah stood in the yard with the tax letter in his hand and the deed in hers, and did not move for a long moment. "You can stay," he said finally. His voice was flat, careful. "For now, until we figure this out. But we're going to be clear about everything from here." Naomi looked at him steadily. "That's all I've ever asked for," she said. "To be clear." The first week was a negotiation conducted entirely in silence. Elijah took the master bedroom and spent the first night staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar quiet of a house that had no traffic outside, no upstairs neighbors, no ambient noise of a city doing its business. Naomi had moved her things to the smaller room at the end of the hall without being asked. Damon took the room that had been Elijah's as a boy, and when Elijah went to check on him that first night, the boy was already asleep with one arm thrown over the edge of the mattress. The divisions in the house were unspoken but precise. Elijah handled the exterior. He walked the property in the early mornings, cataloging what needed doing, making lists in a small notebook the way his father had taught him. The fence line on the east side needed reinforcing. One section of the barn roof had soft spots. The drainage along the north side had been redirected, competently, he noted, with a channel dug by hand, but needed extension before the fall rains came. Naomi handled the interior and the garden. She was up before he was most mornings, and by the time he came downstairs, there was coffee made, and she was already outside moving through the rows with a basket over one arm. She didn't offer him the coffee. She didn't not offer it. She simply made it and left it, and he poured himself a cup and drank it without comment. And that was the arrangement. They were polite. They were careful. They moved around each other like two people sharing a space on a crowded train, not hostile, but intensely aware. What made it complicated was that the house itself kept telling Elijah things he wasn't ready to hear. He'd find evidence of Naomi's work in every room. A window sash reglazed so cleanly the joint was nearly invisible. A section of floor in the hallway resanded and refinished. The kitchen cabinets rehung level, which meant she had taken them down, shimmed the frames, and reset them. That was not the work of someone camping in an empty house. That was the work of someone who cared. He found it easier to be angry when he didn't think about that. Damon had no interest in the unspoken arrangement. On the third morning, he followed Naomi into the garden and started asking questions. What was that one? Why did the tomatoes need caging? Could he plant something? Naomi answered each question directly, without condescension, with just enough detail to be useful. She showed him how to read the soil moisture by pressing 2 fingers an inch below the surface. She told him her father had taught her that, and that her father had learned it from his father, and that some knowledge moved through families the way water moved through ground, slowly, invisibly, until it was just there. Damon listened with the total attention of a child who has gone too long without being taught things by people who knew them. That evening he came in for dinner and announced to Elijah that he was going to grow sweet potatoes. Naomi says the soil here is good for them, he said. Elijah said that was fine. Later, washing dishes, he stood at the kitchen window and watched the last of the light go out of the sky over the garden beds, and felt something he couldn't quite name. Part gratitude, part something that sat closer to shame. A stranger had been teaching his son about the land his grandfather had worked. Naomi had given Damon something in 3 days that Elijah, in 5 years of movement and displacement, had never managed to give him. A reason to put his hands in the dirt and call it his. He was grateful for it. He also could not entirely forgive her for it, which he understood was not a reasonable position to hold. The tax deadline held over everything like weather. By the time they'd arrived and settled, they had roughly 23 days left. Elijah had called the county tax office and confirmed the amount owed. 4 years of delinquent property tax plus penalties, a number that made him sit very still on the porch steps with the phone in his hand for a full minute after hanging up. He could not pay it from savings. He didn't have savings, not the kind that could absorb that number. What he had was his truck, his tools, and the ability to work fast and well. Naomi had the farmer's market income, modest but consistent, and a garden that, if they kept it producing, would sustain that income through the fall season. Neither of them said it directly, but they were both running the same calculation, separately. The math only worked if they stopped running it separately. That conversation was coming. Before it arrived, something else did. On the 9th day, a silver pickup truck turned off the county road and pulled up to the new gate. The man who got out was broad-shouldered and unhurried, wearing a button-front shirt tucked into pressed trousers despite the heat. He had the particular ease of someone who had spent a long time in a place where his name meant something. He looked at the house, the garden, the gate itself, the one Naomi had set in new posts, with an expression of mild professional interest. Then he looked at Naomi and smiled the way people smile when they already know how a conversation ends. "Ms. Reeves," Victor Hale said, "I heard somebody came back." Naomi had seen Victor Hale exactly once before at the farmer's market in early spring. He had stopped at her table, bought nothing, and asked her in a friendly enough tone how long she'd been out at the old Carter place. She'd said a while. He'd nodded and moved on. She had filed him under people to be careful around. Now he was at her gate with that same expression. "I do land development in this county," he said. "Have for about 20 years. And I want to be upfront with you. I've had my eye on this parcel for a while." He glanced across the property with something almost like appreciation. "Good land. Good bones on the house, too. Though I understand that's largely your doing." "What do you want, Mr. Hale?" "Just being neighborly. I wanted to make sure you understood where things stand. That tax debt isn't going away, and the process to push an auction forward, once a buyer acquires the delinquency," he paused, adjusting his cuff, "moves faster than most people expect." "I understand the process fine." "I hope so." His tone settled into a different register. "Because I'd hate to see you caught off guard when this resolves. You've put real work into this place. But work doesn't confer ownership, Ms. Reeves. At the end of this, you're going to need somewhere to go. I can make that easier if you're cooperative." "Cooperative meaning what?" "Meaning you move along before the legal situation forces you to." He said it the way a reasonable man makes a reasonable offer. "Think of it as a transition arrangement." Naomi looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Wait here," and went inside to get Elijah. Elijah had been in the barn when he heard the truck. He followed Naomi back to the yard without asking questions. Victor Hale extended his hand. Elijah did not take it. Hale let the hand drop without embarrassment. He explained his position clearly. He was in a position to acquire the delinquent tax debt, which would give him standing to accelerate the auction timeline significantly. But he'd rather not go that route if there was a cleaner path. "What's the cleaner path?" Elijah said. "You sign a right of first refusal on the sale. I don't push the timeline. You get room to make other arrangements. The woman gets a reasonable exit." He glanced at Naomi. Elijah was quiet. The afternoon light came through the tree line at a low angle, throwing long shadows across the yard. He looked at Hale, the pressed shirt, the silver truck, the practiced ease of a man who had been doing this for 20 years and had rarely been told no. Then he said, "Get off my land." Hale's expression didn't change. "I understand this is emotional, but the math here doesn't change based on how you feel about it, Mr. Carter. You can't cover that debt in the time you have left." He left a beat of silence. "I can. Think about that." He walked back to his truck at the same unhurried pace he'd arrived at and drove away without looking back. Elijah and Naomi stood in the yard after the truck disappeared. "He's been circling this property since before you came back," Naomi said. "He knew about the delinquency." "He said he'd make the exit easier for you," Elijah said. "I heard what he said." "I'm telling you, I'm not taking that deal." It came out flatter than he intended, more like a legal statement than anything else. But he meant it. "He wants the land. Getting rid of you is just part of getting the land. I'm not going to be the one who does that for him." Something shifted in Naomi's face. Not gratitude exactly, but the careful expression of someone deciding whether to believe something. "Okay," she said. "We've got just over 3 weeks," Elijah said, "and we've been running the numbers separately. That's not working." "No," she said, "it's not." "Then let's run them together." They went inside. Damon was at the kitchen table doing homework, and he looked up when they came in and registered something in the air between them. Not tension, for once, but the atmosphere of two people who had just agreed on something. He looked back down at his worksheet and said nothing, but he was smiling at the page in a way he probably thought no one could see. Elijah saw it. The plan was simple because it had to be. Naomi ran the market operation. She had the relationships, the regulars, the reputation. On Saturday mornings, she loaded the truck with vegetables, eggs, jars of preserves, and whatever she'd baked through the week, and came back with cash that went into an envelope taped inside the kitchen cabinet. Elijah worked the neighborhood. He knocked on doors, introduced himself as the Carter boy who'd come back to sort out his parents' place, and asked if anyone had repair work that needed doing. The answer, more often than not, was yes. He was fast and meticulous, And word moved the way it always moved in small communities, person to person, at church, at the feed store. By the second week, he had more work than he could fit into the daylight hours. Damon helped where he could. In the evenings, he tended the rows Naomi had assigned him, checking the soil the way she'd shown him. He had a particular seriousness about the sweet potatoes that Elijah found, privately, very funny. The boy inspected them daily with the focused concern of someone managing a long-term investment. Victor Hale did not come back in person. He didn't need to. The first sign was the fence line on the east side. 2 posts pulled from the ground in a way that wasn't weather damage. Deliberate. Neat. The kind of damage designed to look like neglect. Elijah reset the posts the same afternoon and said nothing about it. The second sign was harder to ignore. At the Saturday market, an older woman named Dorothy, who had bought eggs from Naomi every week for a year and a half, leaned across the table and said, low and careful, "Honey, somebody's been talking. Saying you've been squatting out there. Saying the owner came back and you're refusing to leave." Naomi kept her expression even. "That's not what's happening." "I know that," Dorothy said. "I'm just telling you what's being said." When Naomi told Elijah that evening, he said, "Hale. Had to be." "He's also saying things about you," Naomi said carefully. "That you abandoned the property. That you left and didn't pay taxes and now you've come back to claim something you don't deserve." Elijah said nothing. He picked up the tool he'd been cleaning and turned it over in his hands. "It's not true," Naomi said. "Some of it is." His voice was level, but there was something underneath it that wasn't. "I did leave. I didn't pay the taxes. I didn't come back for 5 years." He set the tool down. "He's not making that up. He's using it to take something from you. That doesn't make it not true." The room was quiet. Outside, through the kitchen window, they could see Damon moving through the garden rows in the last of the evening light. "You don't have to explain yourself to me," Naomi said carefully. "I know I don't." He looked at her. "But you've been here 2 years. You did the work I didn't do. I think I owe you something close to an explanation, even if you're not asking for one." Naomi was quiet. "I couldn't come back," he said. "It wasn't a choice the way people mean when they say choice. Every time I thought about this place, I could only see the people who weren't in it anymore. I know how that sounds." "It doesn't sound like an excuse," she said. "It sounds like grief." A pause. Then Naomi said, "I need to say something, and I need you to hear it as information, not as an attack." "Go ahead." "You don't have the right to be angry about how I've lived in this house. I understand it's yours legally. I understand you have grief attached to it that I can't fully know. But I have 2 years of my hands in this place. I rebuilt things that were falling apart because nobody else was going to. I need you to hold both of those things at the same time. That it's yours, and that I have something real here too." Elijah looked at her for a long moment. "You're right," he said. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was something. That night, after Damon was asleep, Elijah sat on the porch steps and opened the box. He'd been avoiding it since the first day, since he'd walked into the kitchen and seen it sitting on the shelf, placed with a care that had stopped him cold. His mother's handwriting on the folded note, his father's wedding ring beside hers. He read the note. "Elijah, this house will wait for you." Then he looked more closely at the rings. They had been cleaned, not recently, but carefully. The kind of cleaning that takes time and attention, a soft cloth and patience. They were not the dull, tarnished things he'd left behind. Someone had decided they deserved better than to sit forgotten under a floorboard. He already knew who. He set the note down and looked out at the dark yard and understood, without being able to fully articulate it, that his anger at Naomi had always been partly anger at himself, and that the two things were going to have to be separated before he could figure out what came next. Victor Hale made his final move on a Tuesday. Elijah found out through the county tax office, a clerk who called him that morning with the careful, apologetic tone of someone delivering news they didn't enjoy delivering. Hale had filed to acquire the delinquent tax debt through a third-party purchase agreement. The filing was technically legal. What it meant in practical terms, The original 30-day window had been compressed. Once the debt transfer was finalized, Hale had standing to petition for an expedited auction. Elijah sat in the barn after the call and did the math again, the way you do when you already know the answer but keep hoping the numbers will rearrange themselves. They didn't. The envelope in the kitchen cabinet held roughly 40% of what they needed. That evening the storm came in. It had been building since afternoon, the sky going that particular yellow-gray that people who grew up in Georgia learned to recognize before they learned to read. By 9 o'clock, the rain was coming sideways across the yard. Elijah and Naomi moved through the house, securing windows and bringing in anything from the porch that could become a projectile. They worked efficiently and without much talking. Damon was sent upstairs with instructions to stay away from the windows. When the storm passed, they went outside with flashlights. The main house had held. The garden beds had taken damage, but nothing that couldn't be replanted. The greenhouse had not held. Naomi had built it herself over the previous winter, a modest structure attached to the south side of the barn, fitted with corrugated polycarbonate panels sourced secondhand. It had extended her growing season by 6 weeks in both directions, and it was where she'd been cultivating the seedlings and cold-weather crops that represented the core of her fall market income. One of the barn's upper boards had come loose in the wind and struck the greenhouse at an angle. The frame was cracked in 2 places. Roughly a third of the panels were shattered or blown out. The seedling trays inside were scattered and partially destroyed. Naomi stood at the entrance with the flashlight beam moving across the damage and did not say anything for a long time. "I can fix the frame," Elijah said finally. 2 days, maybe 3. "The seedlings are gone," Naomi said. Her voice was flat, managed. "Enough of them. The fall market income drops by more than half without the cold weather crops. We were already short." She paused. "We can't close the gap in time, Elijah." He didn't argue with her. He found Damon awake when he came inside. The boy was sitting at the top of the stairs in the dark, knees pulled to his chest, listening. He had heard more than Elijah had realized. "Is it bad?" Damon asked. "We're going to figure it out." "That's what you say when it's bad." Elijah sat down on the step beside him. "It's hard, yeah." Damon was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are we leaving?" "I haven't decided anything yet." "But you're thinking about it." Elijah didn't answer. "You said we weren't going to do that anymore," Damon said. His voice was very careful and very quiet. "You said this was different. You said it to me, Dad, not just talking. You said it like you meant it." Elijah put his arm around his son and felt the boy go tense for a moment before leaning into it. They sat on the top step in the dark with the sound of dripping water coming from the yard outside. He did not sleep well that night. In the morning, Damon came downstairs and sat at the kitchen table and did not touch his breakfast. When Naomi set a plate in front of him, he looked at it and looked away. When she asked if he was okay, he said yes, in the tone that meant no, and excused himself to sit on the porch. Elijah watched this from the kitchen doorway. He had seen that particular stillness in Damon before. It was the same stillness the boy had worn in the weeks after Renee died, when he was too young to understand what had happened, but old enough to understand that something had been taken and wasn't coming back. It was the face of a child who had learned that the things he attached himself to had a way of disappearing. Elijah had spent 5 years trying not to be the reason for that face. He was looking at it now. He went outside and sat next to Damon on the porch steps. The morning was cool and clear after the storm, the yard smelling of wet earth and cut grass, every surface washed and sharp. "I'm not leaving," Elijah said. Damon looked up at him. "I don't know exactly how we fix this yet," Elijah said, "but I'm not leaving. That's not one of the options anymore." Damon studied his father's face, the particular scrutiny of a child who has been disappointed before and has learned to check. Then he picked up his fork and started eating. When Elijah came back inside, he found Naomi in the hallway with a bag half-packed on the floor beside her. She wasn't rushing. She was folding things slowly, the way a person folds things when they're trying to decide whether they actually want to put them away. She looked up when she heard him. "I've been thinking," she said. "If I leave now, before any of this forces it, at least it's my choice. I've done that before, left before someone could make me." Elijah looked at the bag. Then he walked to the kitchen and came back with the wooden box. He set it on the hallway table between them and opened it. He took out his mother's wedding ring and placed it carefully on the table beside the box. "My mother left that note," he said. "She left these rings. She left this house. She meant for it to be kept." He looked at Naomi. "You kept it. You kept all of it, including this." He nodded at the ring. "When you had no reason to. I think she'd want you to know that someone noticed." Naomi looked at the ring for a long moment. She didn't pick it up. "I'm not asking you to stay because I need the help," Elijah said. "I'm asking you to stay because you belong here. Not on paper, not legally, but in every way that actually matters." Naomi was quiet. Then she unfolded the shirt she'd been holding and put it back on the shelf. She left the bag on the floor. "Okay," she said. "Then let's figure it out." Elijah spent the next morning alone in the barn, sorting through lumber from the greenhouse damage. He was setting aside what could be reused when he looked at his toolbox. The good one. The Festool kit he'd assembled piece by piece over 5 years of contract work. Track saw, drill, sander, router. It had traveled in the bed of his truck through 6 cities and 100 jobs. It was the one thing he'd built for himself in 5 years of building things for other people. He looked at it for a long time. Then he took out his phone and called a tool reseller in Atlanta. He described what he had. The man named a figure. It was not the full gap, but combined with the envelope in the kitchen cabinet and 2 outstanding payments he could collect early, it was close enough that a lawyer might be able to work with it. He said he'd bring the kit in by noon. The lawyer's name was Robert Pruitt, Dorothy's son-in-law, a compact and precise man who asked questions in rapid sequence and had very little patience for information delivered out of order. Elijah and Naomi sat across from him that afternoon and laid out everything. Pruitt read through the documents. Then he took off his glasses and said, "Hale made an error. Under Georgia property law, before a third party could acquire delinquent tax debt on an heir-held property, the current owner of record was required to receive direct written notification. And if their address was insufficient, a secondary notification process was mandated before the acquisition could be finalized. Elijah had been living without a fixed address for 5 years. His last known address on record was a forwarding address in Cincinnati that had been inactive for 8 months. Hale's attorneys had sent notification to that address. They had not completed the secondary process. "It doesn't void the delinquency," Pruitt said. "You still owe the taxes, but it creates a procedural defect in the acquisition filing. If we challenge it today, we can push the auction date back to the original window. And given the extent of the notification failure, the court may grant additional time beyond that. I've seen judges add 2 to 3 weeks as remedy in cases like this." "How long to file?" Naomi asked. "Today. Hearing inside a week if we request emergency consideration." Pruitt looked at Elijah. "You'd need to show demonstrable progress on the tax debt. Partial payment, documented income, a credible plan." "We have that," Elijah said. "Then let's get started." The next weeks were dense with movement. Elijah collected the 2 outstanding payments, both contractors paying in full without argument. Naomi worked the market and came back with the best single-day number she'd recorded since she'd started selling. Dorothy bought twice her usual order and told 3 people why, and those 3 people told others. The community showed up in the way small communities sometimes do when the situation is legible and the people are known. A neighboring farmer whose fence Elijah had repaired brought a check and said he was paying in advance for fall work. 2 women who'd been buying Naomi's preserves for a year each placed bulk orders for the holiday season, paid up front. Nobody made speeches. It was just people deciding, one at a time, to be on the right side of something. The hearing was on a Thursday morning. Pruitt presented the procedural defect clearly and without theater. Hale's attorney argued the notification had been sufficient. The judge, A woman in her 60s who had been hearing property cases in this county for 20 years and had seen Victor Hale's name on filings before, asked 3 precise questions, reviewed the documentation, and ruled that the acquisition filing was procedurally deficient. The original tax deadline was reinstated, with an additional 18 days granted as remedy for the notification failure. Hale sat in the second row with the expression of a man recalculating. They paid the debt with 4 days to spare. November came to the farmhouse the way it always had, gradually, then all at once. The mornings turned cold enough to see your breath. The garden beds went into their fall rotation. The tree line went orange and then brown and then bare. And the 40 acres opened up in a way that was visible only in winter, the full shape of the land, the gentle fall of the terrain toward the creek at the eastern boundary, the sky sitting close and wide above it all. Elijah had not seen this property in November since he was 19 years old. He walked the fence line on the first cold morning the way his father used to, checking posts and wire with his hands in his jacket pockets. The east fence was solid. He'd rebuilt that section himself, post by post. He stopped at the corner where the east and north lines met, a spot where he and his father used to sit on the top rail in the early morning when he was a boy. The rail was new. He had set it himself in September, but the view was the same. The long grass, the creek glinting at the far edge, the absolute quiet of a piece of land that had been in one family's hands for 3 generations. He stayed there for a while. Inside the house, things had settled into a shape that no one had designed and no one needed to name. Elijah had set up his woodworking operation in the barn, the basic tools he'd kept after selling the Festool kit, supplemented steadily with second-hand equipment sourced from estate sales. It was slower going at first, but by November the gaps were largely filled and the work was good. He'd started taking on custom furniture commissions in addition to repair jobs, which paid better and suited him more. He had a 6-week backlog going into December. Naomi had expanded the kitchen garden by 1/3 and was developing a wholesale arrangement with 2 restaurants in the county seat. A chef who cared about sourcing had come to the Saturday market in October, tasted the preserves, and asked if she could supply year-round. She was working out the logistics. It was the kind of problem she liked: specific, solvable, worth solving. The greenhouse had been rebuilt. Elijah had framed it with new lumber, properly this time anchored to the barn foundation, and Naomi had sourced replacement panels and fitted them herself. It was sturdier than the first version and larger by about 1/3. They had not discussed who it belonged to. It belonged to the place, which was enough. Damon had started at the local school in September. By October, he had 2 friends he brought home on Fridays. His sweet potato had been eaten at dinner in early October, prepared simply and declared by its grower to be the best sweet potato anyone in the history of the Carter family had ever tasted. No one disputed this. One evening in late November, after Damon was in bed, Elijah and Naomi sat on the porch with coffee. The night was cold and clear, the stars very bright the way they get in rural Georgia when there's no cloud cover and no competing light. They had been sitting for a while without talking, which was something they'd gotten comfortable with. The kind of silence that doesn't require filling. Elijah reached into his jacket pocket and set something on the porch rail between them. It was his mother's wedding ring. Naomi looked at it but didn't touch it. "I've been trying to figure out how to say something," Elijah said. "I'm not good at this." "I know," she said, not unkindly. "You cleaned those rings," he said, "back when you found them, before I ever came back, before you knew who they belonged to or if anyone was ever coming for them. You just took care of them, because they seemed like they deserved it." Naomi was quiet. "My mother would have liked you," he said. I'm not saying that as anything more than what it is, I just think it's true. She would have liked someone who looked at a broken thing and decided it was worth fixing." Naomi picked up the ring. She held it for a moment, then set it back on the rail between them. "I didn't fix it for anyone," she said. "I fixed it because I needed somewhere to land." "I know," Elijah said. "So did I." The night was quiet around them. Somewhere down the creek line, something moved in the underbrush. The house behind them was warm and lit, and through the kitchen window, the overhead light threw a yellow rectangle across the porch boards. Neither of them moved to go inside. Elijah had come back to Georgia thinking he was returning for a piece of property, something to save, something to sort out, something to pass down before it was lost. He had not expected to find the house already saved. He had not expected that saving it again, together, would cost him something real and give him back something he hadn't known he was still missing. He had not expected, at 34 years old, after everything that had been taken, to sit on his family's porch on a cold November night and feel, with some surprise, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The ring sat on the rail between them, catching the light from the kitchen window. Neither of them said anything else about it that night, but neither of them moved it either. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't going back. It's believing that what you left behind still has something left to offer you. Elijah ran from a house full of grief and came back to find it full of life, put there by someone who had nothing but needed something to hold on to. Two people who had lost everything, in the same place at the same time, for reasons that had nothing to do with chance and everything to do with the kind of quiet stubbornness it takes to keep going when the easier thing would be to stop. They didn't save the house saved them. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever had to go back somewhere you weren't sure you could face, or held on to something that didn't belong to you because it was the only thing keeping you grounded, this channel has more stories like this one. Real people, hard choices, and the kind of endings that feel earned. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.